Ahead and get started. My name is Julie Preddy. I'm with the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center here at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Happy for you to join us today for how to launch a successful marketing campaign with Melissa Forziat. And I'd like to welcome everybody. Melissa's going to give you some details about some housekeeping things. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Julie. It's so good to be back. I always love presenting for the ASBTDC. This is always a group with such good questions. So this is going to be a lot of material. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on who I am to help you get an understanding of where all of this presentation material comes from, how I'm looking at it, because I do think that'll influence how you process it as well. So welcome back to anybody who's seen a presentation from me before. I'm so glad to have you back. For those who don't know me, I actually started my career doing major international sport events. So I worked Olympic Winter Games, I worked Rugby World Cup, I worked with the US Olympic Committee, huge brands, huge events that are operating at a very big scale. The good thing about that is you get to see the complexity of the campaigns that they do. That big scale makes it really very obvious what they're trying to do when you're on the inside. Now, a dozen years ago, I started my own business and I started working with mostly small businesses and nonprofits. And it became a question for me of how do you take those great principles of marketing I learned at that very large scale and how do you make them work for businesses like mine and maybe yours that don't have anywhere near those resources? We still have to get it done. We still have to build our audience and keep them with us. So a lot of times the way that I'm looking at that is by thinking about how can we be efficient? How can we be practical with our resources? And part of that for me is when you're doing some sort of a marketing campaign, how can you squeeze every last drop out of it? That's an expression I like to think about a lot for myself. How can I squeeze every last drop out of the communication opportunities that are available to me through whatever campaign I'm doing? And the more you plan to do that within each campaign, the fewer you need to do to get the kind of momentum you need for your business. So that's the angle that I'll be taking here. And as we go through this presentation today, you are going to see a lot of very detailed slides to that effect. You may think you have no business creating such detailed, wordy slides, but they're meant to be a resource for you later to apply that back to your business and to think about the campaigns that you're running and how you can sort of plug it in to not exactly the formula I'm using because there's not a generic formula for it, but you'll see my approach and you can use that to slot in your own plans for your own campaigns and hopefully squeeze every last drop out for whatever your business is trying to do. Now, before we get into the material itself, a few quick housekeeping items, like Julie said. This is a really good time to minimize distractions on your end if you can, if there's a ringer on your phone or if there's a messaging device on in the background. If there's anything happening in the background for you that you can shut down or minimize right now, this is a great time to do it because the more you're thinking about your business in the context of this material, the more you're going to get from it. Again, just to reiterate, these slides, even more than most presentations for me, they're meant to be a takeaway resource for you to refer to later. So there's a lot on these slides, and hopefully that'll be handy for you after the fact. In terms of questions, I think you're going to find that this material sort of unfolds. We start with more of a theoretical angle, and then we very quickly start getting into more and more detail in a layered way. So I'm going to encourage you to hold your questions for the end because it may be that you have a question partway in that gets answered as we go through. But I will save time for questions at the end, and I'm also happy to answer questions related to your specific business as we get there. And having said that, we'll take those questions in the chat, and this is a great time for everybody to make sure they know where that chat feature is for them. So this is a great time. I've introduced myself. Feel free to go into the chat and introduce yourselves. Tell us your business name, your name, and what your business does. This is a great opportunity for you to see if there are any people in the chat that you could potentially collaborate with in some way. So be shopping for that while I'm doing this little intro piece. You never know who you'll find. So feel free to make sure your chat is set to everyone because that means anybody can see, anybody who's here live can see what you're writing. So I look forward to seeing who's on with me live, but here's what we're going to be talking about today. Here's how I've divided up this material. We're going to start very briefly by just defining the word campaign because I used a word that can mean many things when I introduced this material. So let's put some language to what I mean by campaign here and many of the different things that that can encompass. Then we're going to get into setting objectives, an important first step of the campaign. Then we're going to spend a pretty long amount of time on establishing timelines, and that part's going to get really detailed. And then we're going to wrap up with a section about debriefing before I then debrief at the end with you. So those are the different sections that we'll look at here. We have about an hour together. So just hopefully if you feel like all of that makes sense to you and that you're in the right place, I'm so glad to have you here. And let's jump into it. Let's talk about how to launch a successful marketing campaign. And it's so good to see people jumping into the chat and sharing what their businesses are. Hopefully you're finding some connections along the way if you're on with me live. All right, let's jump in first by defining campaign because I don't know that there's a way for us to move forward if I haven't put some ideas to what that could mean. So you may have a specific idea in your head what that means related to your business, and that's great. Take that with you, but there's actually quite a range of different things that can be folded into this term. Today, we're going to focus on complex campaigns. My goal is to make every campaign as complex as possible in terms of squeezing every last drop out of it. And with that idea, maybe you don't have to do as many, but you get more out of each one. So when we think about what that could include, let's include events in that. And events can be all kinds of things. They can be on-site in-person events. They can be things that are virtual. They can be a series. They can be a one-off. There's so many different ways to label what an event can be. Different people can have ownership of hosting the event, but if you think of it as something that has a date and a time and a place, and you're inviting people to it, let's consider that events. Also, new messaging could be another type of complex campaign. It could be it could be something that you are launching. It could be just any new way of speaking to your audience. Generally, I espouse the idea of being consistent in your messaging to keep a pattern going for your audience. But sometimes we need to introduce something new. And I'm going to have a couple of different examples of that as I add more bullet points here. But new messaging in any form can be something that becomes a complex campaign. Rebrands could be one of those things. Rebrands are way more complex than a lot of people give them credit for. If you've ever undertaken a rebrand for a big company, you have a much better perspective of how involved that process actually is. I think a lot of small businesses think they can just make changes really quickly without realizing that they're not taking their audience with them. So I encourage you, if you're looking at a rebrand in your near future, consider this a complex campaign and really attach some of the principles that I'm going to share to that today. Product or service launches could be folded into new messaging, but maybe this is something that happens regularly for your business, or maybe it's something that's infrequent for your business. And how often it happens is something that you can consider as you come up with your plans. So, for example, if it almost never happens, but now you're launching a new service, then that's something really special that needs to be messaged over a long period of time. If you have a business where you have, let's say, seasonal collections for something, then maybe this is something that there's more of a rhythm for around your business and people come to expect it, and you might treat it differently as a result. New partnerships. This is another one. Again, you could kind of fold that under new messaging, but new partnerships is about saying, oh, I've got this other collaborator that I'm working with, and here's what we're rolling out. And in that case, you probably want to be coordinated in some way to have some transparency with each other so that you can get consistent or coordinated on the timing, how you're rolling things out, how you're sharing each other's messaging, that kind of thing. Contests. Contests, in a way, they're kind of an event, and they can take that form. But there's a prize associated with it. There's maybe a partnership associated with it. Again, like a lot of these things are cousins of each other, but just trying to give you some different options to consider here. And of course, new programs, and this is especially the kind of term you might use if you run a nonprofit, where you think of things more as programs than as products or services. Um, and that's sort of a cousin of product or service launches, but you'd call it a different thing for a different type of business. Those are some examples of some of the things that we would be looking out for complex campaigns. But the idea is that with any of these things, complex campaigns, they allow for multi-channel marketing. The idea is that whatever you're doing, whatever campaign you're doing, gives you a reason to communicate through all the different mediums, all the different ways you're communicating with your audience or audiences. And the question becomes, or even find new audiences to communicate with through that process. So the question is, how can you, again, squeeze every last drop out of it along the way? Again, we could be looking at the difference between online and in person for these campaigns. But actually, although the execution of this probably looks different from a logistics standpoint, I would say, like, the process that I'm going to give you for how you work on the campaign doesn't really change between online and in person. It's still about making sure that uh, you've defined success, like we're going to talk about, that you've got the timeline in place, and that you've got a debrief plan in place. So whether you're looking at something that's online or in person, you can still take the wisdom that I'm sharing here and apply it to what you're doing. Something that I want to make really clear is, as much as I'm trying to give you specific examples as I'm going through, I understand that I'm not going to be able to imagine up every single kind of campaign that you're going to be running. And that doesn't mean this presentation doesn't apply to you. It's about taking the ideas and seeing which ones work for the type of campaign that you're trying to run. So, having said that, I use the word complex because if you can plan a complex campaign, you could probably plan a simple one, whatever a simple one might look like. If there's something that seems really straightforward, I'm doing this thing, I send one email, I get this person on board, we're ready to go, great, that's simple. But with the things that we're talking about, they create so many opportunities for communication about your business or about your project or about your campaign that you want to take advantage of all of those. And this is about giving yourself enough time, enough leeway to imagine all the people that you need to loop into the process, and then having a plan for how you're going to execute that with enough time to actually do it. Now, having said that, the first place this has to start is by setting objectives. Because how do you know if your event worked if you haven't set objectives? Or how do you know your campaign worked if you haven't set objectives? So define success before you start to plan. And usually that helps you make decisions along the way. If you have a very clear picture of what your endpoint is, what your goal actually is, there are going to be a lot of different opportunities that may be presented to you along the way in the execution phase. And you may need to make quick decisions about what works or doesn't work, or what belongs or doesn't belong in the context of the campaign that you're running. And the more you've defined success in a clear way, the easier it will be to say yes or no quickly to those things that come up for you as you go through. Also, having said that, clear objectives often dictate your best tactical options. So if you're trying to decide how to move forward, you have many paths in front of you. It can be a lot harder to make those choices if it's like nothing is tethered for you in what a functioning campaign or a successful campaign actually looks like. So again, the more time you spend getting really clear on what success looks like, the easier it's going to be to run your event. And even having said that, it may not even be that it takes a whole lot of time to get that done, but it does take some time, and it does take some decision making. And it can be especially challenging to do if you have many people involved in the hosting of an event. So the more people that are involved, you have committees of people involved or multiple businesses involved, allow a little bit more time for this process to decide, do we all need to have the same definition of success? And if so, what is it? Because you'd be surprised how often it happens where you get like well into the planning of something and then you realize you're all working at different purposes. So that's not an ideal situation, and that's something that can be prevented up front. Now, in terms of goals, like, okay, if we're all agreed on the idea that you want to define what success looks like, what are your options? Let me present some for you. Again, as just a means of starting the brainstorming process, there may be something else for you that you want to include here, but here's some things to consider. Brand awareness is one. Brand awareness is more about just giving people a general sense that your company exists, your product or services exist, and it doesn't necessarily have a significant drive towards like substantial calls to action that would take a lot from your audience. It's more about saying, hey, we're here. Did you know that? And while that may not feel efficient for you if you're a small business owner trying to get sales, it does take a certain number of touch points for people to be ready to buy from you and for people to be aware of you when they're ready to buy whatever your product or service is from any other company. So, brand awareness can actually be a really important part of the process. And, if your audience is going to need a lot of touch points before they're ready to take action, this can be a really important goal to consider as the primary goal of success. Now, driving website traffic can be another one. It could very well be that you're trying to just get people to your site. This is an extension of brand awareness, but also if your website is well structured, once you get them there, now they are exposed to all the things you offer, all the things that you share with them, products or services they can buy, information that you're putting out there, other links that you're distributing. So driving website traffic can very well be a primary goal that you have. Establishing reputation can be another one. Maybe it's not enough for them to know that your company exists. Maybe it's also important that they understand what your company is about in the general marketplace, maybe compared to your competitors, even. It could also be, crisis communications may fall under this as well. If you are trying to overcome an unfortunate situation or unfortunate messaging that's going around about your company, sometimes this is a primary goal that we come to as a defensive tactic. But establishing reputation is an important one. People need to know that they can trust your products or services before they buy them. Building stakeholder relationships is another one here, and that can be like you're seeking partnerships. It can be you want to nurture your VIPs or your volunteers or your donors, or there might be specific target markets within your community that you want to make sure that you're showing them some love, that you're getting their feedback, that you're whatever this campaign is intended to do. It could be that you're also taking all of your target markets to try to message them through this campaign, but each one might have a specific goal that you're attaching to them. You might not be trying to do the same thing with VIPs as you are to brand new customers. So how would you approach each one differently? This is something you actually should get clear on before the event starts so you don't miss opportunities to get the right message to them. Okay, lead generation is another one. And I'll divide this up into two different goals within lead generation. One is getting a volume of leads, and one is getting a certain quality of leads. And believe it or not, a lot of the time, the strategies for doing those two things are completely different. This also comes down if you've ever had a situation where you were considering, okay, well, I'm thinking about hosting this event. Should I do it for free or should I have a fee to attend? This is again comes down to the question of what's your goal, a volume of leads or high quality leads? And a lot of those decisions get answered if you've made this choice from the very beginning. Increasing revenue. I mean, if it's just straight up, I want sales. Okay. Hopefully you've done a lot of groundwork to build the brand awareness, to build the reputation with your community. And now if it's just about increasing that revenue and getting those sales, How do you approach that to make sure that you're getting that clearly out there? Also, it could be that you're trying to set up upsells, which is really about saying, hey, did you know that, hey, you guys are so great. You've been supporting me at this level. Did you know this exists? And that can either be with the intent of selling the thing right there, or it may be laying the foundation for um, a future push for sales for that next tier of your offerings. And then, of course, forging new partnerships. This is a type of stakeholder. You may already have some collaborations, you may already have some partnerships, but most complex campaigns give you a lot of creative opportunities to create new relationships that you can bring with you into the future. You could spend a lot of time in this area and get a lot of benefit from it. And this is where the complexity of the campaigns, I think, really shines if you have the time to do it. So, okay, those are some of the goals. Now, maybe you have an event or campaign or project or messaging that you want to start thinking about and getting that together. So, as you're going through this presentation, think about like what goals would be right for the type of campaign you are looking to run. And, it doesn't have to be the same as anybody else on this call. It's really about deciding what are the right goals for the campaign you want to achieve. Sometimes you don't know exactly what form the campaign needs to take, but when you make decisions like this, it helps you decide that. Now, having said that, once you've come up with the goal, the only way to squeeze every last drop out of a campaign is to get very particular about the timeline that you're operating on. So, I'd like to show you, look, there are actually even more detailed ways to do this than what I'm going to show you today. But what I'd like to at least accomplish, knowing that everybody who's on this call and everybody who's watching this back is probably dealing with a different campaign for a different type of business. So I'm going to try to keep this as general as I can while getting as specific as I can to show you what thought process I would go through in trying to establish a timeline. And hopefully that process is something you can follow as you plan your specific campaign. So the three stages of a campaign that I want you to consider here before we look at any specific details are the on-ramp, the launch or the day of the event or campaign, and the off-ramp. A lot of people only think of a campaign, especially if it's an event, they only think of it as the day of. And if you do that, you aren't likely to succeed with any of the goals that we've just talked about. What you really need is to spend a lot of time in that on-ramp setting up for the launch or for the day of, because that will help other people be ready to receive what you're putting out there and to participate in it. And the off ramp is also a really important part that most people get too tired to consider because, like, the adrenaline of running the campaign wears off and you want to sleep, you want to tie things up, and it just ends up like you end up missing a lot of the off ramp if you haven't planned for it. We're going to look at all of these stages as we look at the timeline. The truth is that the longer the on-ramp is, the more successful your launch can actually be. So I really want to make sure that that when you look at your campaign, you consider all three of those elements very important to the overall campaign that you're running. Remember, campaigns, I like to think of them as a backdrop. They're a reason for you to communicate with all kinds of people for as long as you possibly can. You can use a campaign as a reason to message people for months. I gave you the example of the Olympics. We used the Olympics as a backdrop to message people for years. And, the longer you can stretch it, the better off you are. I would say it's probably better to do a smaller number of campaigns in great detail, not missing opportunities, than to have things that are run really frequently where you are missing opportunities. So consider, how do I use this as a way to just keep communicating with people? Now, I'm going to show you a format here, and as we go along, you're going to think to yourself, like, Melissa, you're putting way too many words on screen. Again, we're getting into the section of the presentation where this is really about giving you a resource for later. So I'm going to walk you through this, even though the slides may seem to have only subtle differences. We're going to talk about designing your timeline. As you can see, this is the format I'm using. I've broken this down to the on-ramp, the launch or day of, which is really just that line, and then the off-ramp or the post-launch or the post-event timeline. As we go through, we're gonna fill some things into this. Big picture though, what goes into each section? This is where you start thinking about all the ways that you're communicating with the different audiences you're communicating with. And if you need to break it down, where you define how you're communicating with each audience separately, that's a great way to do it to make sure you don't miss any opportunities to slot things into the timeline that we're going to be looking at. So some ideas to consider here are things like, okay, how does your website factor in to your messaging? How do you make sure that your campaign is listed there? Do you have a blog? Can you write, is it video or is it written or whatever form it's in? Can you have one that goes out specific to your event? Can you have more than one? Newsletter, are you communicating by a regular monthly newsletter? Can you also add in an additional email blast or a text blast? Maybe it's tailored to the different audiences you're trying to reach. Are you on different social media platforms? How can you use those to communicate the things that you're trying to put out there? If we go back around to the bottom left, podcasts or interviews. Which, maybe we even loop that in with PR or features. Is this something that you run, or is it something that you can be a guest on? Is it something that you can be interviewed for? Those are some elements that could potentially be harnessed. Going back up to the top or the middle there, partner outreach. Partnership, I'm a huge fan of collaboration and partner outreach, either to partners you've already worked with in the past or ones you think would be a good fit for the campaign that you're running. That is definitely an element you can include. On-site signage, if you have a brick and mortar, this is a great opportunity to make sure anybody who actually walks in is aware of what you're trying to do. Mailers, that could be a thing that you do. Targeted ads as well, and that could be in a digital format or a printed format. Community events. So you'll notice I have community events and self-hosted events here. Community events being, are there other events that are happening in the community, other things that are going on that you can show up at and not necessarily ambush market people, because nobody loves that, but are there other places where you can show up, be a presence, and maybe that's an opportunity for people to become aware of the thing that you're trying to do. And the fact that you're there supporting the other event may establish that goodwill for them to help you shout that out. Whereas self-hosted events, if you have events that you're running in the lead up to the big campaign that you're trying to do, your events become an opportunity to mention to your audience what other things are coming up for you, such as the campaign. And then stoking word of mouth, it's a very broad category, but the question is, like, all of these methods are about you reaching out directly to people, but how can you up level any of these things by making every message easy to share? How can you make it so everybody who comes away from hearing a message from you directly has an easy means of saying, oh, a person I've been talking with, this is the thing we were talking about last week. There's an event happening. How can you make it as easy as possible to get all of these channels shared by the people who receive them? So when you think about that, again, how do you then decide, okay, maybe you've only got one audience and you decide what channels you have, and that's a little easier to plug in. Or maybe you need to write down, each target market and how you're communicating with each one. You want to make sure you reach them on every one of those platforms, online or offline, to get your message across about the campaign that you're running. Now, let's start actually looking at this with the timeline. So we've got, step one was choosing your channels. We've already done that. Step two, plug in the launch date. Okay, let's say it's March 15th. That's the day of the launch of whatever the thing is that you're running. Okay, perfect. What you're going to notice here in this presentation, because from this point for the next quite a few slides, they're going to look like subtle differences. It's going to be this format. But what I'm changing, anytime I add something, I'm putting it in orange. So look for the orange additions on each new slide. So, okay, on this one, we've basically just said, here's what the launch day is. Perfect. That gives us something clear that we can work around. Now, the next step here is plug in any marketing that you're doing, any marketing tactics that already have predetermined dates. So, whatever this business is, let's say we look at the pre-launch period and we see, okay, we've got newsletters that are going out the 15th of every month. That's great. I've got a webinar coming up on March 1st. I also have a networking event that's some third-party event that's coming up on February 5th. All of those things are things that already have fixed dates that I want to make sure I'm folding them into my communications about this campaign somehow. Perfect. All right. So we've slotted those in to make sure we don't miss those opportunities. All right. Now, with that in mind, plug in the announcement day that you want to have across all public channels. Okay. So this is working backwards. We know the launch day, we know the newsletter dates, the webinar date, the community networking event date. Okay. So what would be the right place to put an announcement? Okay, February 1st. That's what I've decided on here. And that's going to be something we leverage the website, blog, social media, email blasts. We're going to get as many different avenues out there as possible. But at that point, it will be public information for everybody to be aware of. Okay, so now we're working towards that being an important day in the timeline. Step 5, plug in direct outreach to any key people or stakeholders. And that may need to happen before the public launch. If you've got people who are, you'll see on the left side here, VIPs or really important partners that would be frustrated to hear about the news at the same time as every other person, maybe you need to tell them earlier. Okay, when can you give them a heads up? How about like, okay, give them a few days after New Year's and perfect. I'll reach out to them January 5th. Maybe that even gives you a chance to reach out to them a couple times with follow-ups in case you have any questions. And maybe you also want to have something that is direct outreach, not to VIPs, but like a, did you see that this has been announced message? Maybe you set that as a February 1 to 4. You have several days there to say, okay, the announcement went out, and hey, I really care about you, and I just want to make sure you saw this. So on the back of your announcement, you share that announcement with anybody that you feel you want to. The more people you do that with personally, the more word of mouth you're likely to get for your campaign. Step 6, plug in some time here for creating graphics or promotional materials, which you want to do fairly early because you're going to need all of this for basically every other thing that's on this timeline. So let's say you plan, January 10th, before you doing the announcement, maybe you give yourself enough time to see what partners want to work with you on it so you're not having to redo promotions. Figure out a timeline here where you won't have to do a lot of redos, but you have plenty of advance notice to just be able to use this material for later. Okay, now we're going to look at step 7, plugging in ongoing public outreach. Okay, let's say you have things like social media accounts that you can use, or email marketing you can use, or email sequences coming off of a webinar with people who attended that. This is where you can start drafting. You can even pre-draft the all of the messaging that you're going to be doing on a regular basis. Are we saying, oh, do you want to have a message a week on social media or a few messages a week on social media? Are you going to do an email sequence of March 1st to March 15th? How many emails can you drop for those people who attended the webinar? Can you get 5 emails out there encouraging them to attend launch day? So, this is about really, again, you'll see, I talk about squeezing every last drop, and hopefully you're getting a sense that that's what the goal is here. Once you've done the on-ramp, you want to do the same thing for the off-ramp, because again, this is the piece a lot of people miss. So start by plugging in the fixed dates. We've got those newsletter dates. Great. Those are opportunities to remind people of the campaign that you did and the successes that you've had. But what about any event specific outreach you might want to do? Right after you do a campaign, you probably want to send some thank yous. You might want to crowdsource content. Get surveys, photos, testimonials, whatever you can get from the people right after, like while it's still really fresh in their memories. This will give you content to put in those newsletters later. You might want to have a couple days to check in with partners. Now that you have gathered information from people, you can report that back to the partners who were working with you, the collaborators who were working with you on this. You can be sharing all of this information you're gathering by social media. You can be dripping it out, splitting it up, dividing it up into as many different pieces of content as possible. Every testimonial can have its own place. Every stat, every piece of valid information about how successful your event was can be dripped out through any means of communication that you have. So, when you look at the whole structure of this, you can see how many opportunities there are to take advantage of here, even with a hypothetical campaign. And having said that, make sure you add a step 10 in there. At some point before your launch, make a list of the content you want to gather during launch day. That is the day people are flocking to the thing that you've created. It may be a day if they're on site with you, maybe you can gather your own photo content, your own testimonials, your own whatever. If it's not that, can you gather stats? If it's online, can you gather any analytics about how many people saw your campaign? All the different ways that you can gather that, make a list of what you actually need, because on the day of your launch, you'll want to know, like, there'll be so many things to do. You want to know exactly what is required here. You may even be able to delegate it once you've created this list for yourself, but you can if you haven't made the list. So this is all part of creating that timeline and making it as rich and full as possible. And the truth is that the people who don't plan the off ramp in particular, I've said this a couple times, but I can't reiterate it enough. If you don't plan that off ramp in advance, you're probably going to miss opportunities, because we tend to crash. We tend to have that come down from launching the big thing. It's inevitable. But when you know that there's still some work to be done, you can game plan for that. And sometimes you can stave off the crash until after you've done some of that. And this is the really important stuff to communicate with people in the immediate aftermath that you don't want to miss out on. Because the truth is, the best marketing happens in that off-ramp period. Things like you can remind participants of the campaign or the event while it's fresh in their minds. You can inspire testimonials or crowdsourced content. You can get them to share those experiences that they had. You might very well be stoking word of mouth with other people in the process, which may make it much easier to market the same campaign next year if you have an annual thing that's happening. Or if it's not an event, if it was a launch of something, it now signals new people to be on the lookout for the next campaign that you're going to run. It also makes non-participants wish they had been there for future reference. So you don't even have to. What's so good about it is the messaging here is, ooh, this was really cool. Keep this in mind for the future, but you don't have to have a direct ask. So there's nothing to off-put them at the same time. It's only good, warm, fuzzy messaging that's happening. Also, it's a chance to get brand recognition, again, with no hard sell looming. So either for people who were participating in the campaign or not, there's no threat of a hard sell. It's just a celebration of your brand, and that will serve you very, very well when you go into the next campaign that you're trying to run. So these are all some things to consider. Hopefully you're kind of sold on the idea of, like, all of these elements are important parts of your timeline: the on-ramp, the off-ramp, and the launch day, by whatever terms launch day needs to take for the specific campaign that you're running. And hopefully this starts to give you some ideas of what would belong in a timeline for whatever type of campaign you're running. Again, if what you saw on screen just then didn't feel exactly like the type of campaign you're running, make it, just basically take the options that would fit for the type of campaign you're running. The timeline can still work with the right elements for you. The last piece of this to consider is debriefing. And this is an element that shouldn't be ignored and should have a plan. But a lot of us, with an event or a campaign behind us, we often don't have as much focus on this piece, but it is a pretty important element for a lot of reasons. So I recommend building into the off ramp, into your schedule, what the evaluation process looks like and who needs to be involved in it. I didn't include that on the timeline from the last section, but you could and maybe should. So that could be a step 11 that we add there. Here are some things to consider. Questions like, did you accomplish your objectives? You took time to establish your objectives before the event. So now, did you accomplish them? Um, if so, what worked? And if not, why not? Gather results of data you collected. This may be especially useful in an online format. If you have something that was on site, was there data you were able to collect along the way? And again, that hopefully is driving towards understanding, did you accomplish the objectives? Stakeholder feedback. This is really important. Give people an opportunity to share what worked and what didn't. Let them know you value their opinion, because whether or not you run another campaign like this in the future, you probably want them to support your company or your business in some other way. So wouldn't it be nice for them to know that they're being heard? So this is a chance to gather that feedback, to thank them for that feedback. There's at least 2 touch points in there with all of those important stakeholders. Team feedback. I guess your team is potentially a stakeholder in this as well, but I want to get specific with team feedback because they know what it looked like to run the campaign. Their feedback is inherently going to be different from most other stakeholders. This can be some of the most difficult feedback to take in because when we're operating a campaign, all we see are the fires that we're putting out, the problems that we had to overcome. But that's important information too. And to know what worked and what didn't from your team may or may not reflect the experience that the attendees of your campaign had or the participants of your campaign had. But it is important information in terms of the logistic planning and the efficiency of operating. So gather information about what worked well and what needs improvement. And what you do with all this information, that's to be decided. At least gather it, and then you can figure out what to do with it later. The truth is that constant campaigns with no time for reflection doesn't really help anybody. And I know a lot of business owners who do this. They run an event or a campaign or a launch, and then they come back to me and they say, okay, should I be doing this monthly? Should I be doing this again? It's like, well, did it work the first time? Did you squeeze every last drop out of it the first time? And if so, is it worth doing again to get the same results? If you haven't answered those questions, it's really hard to know if it's worth continuing the process that you've been going through along the way. So take that time to reflect, build in time to pause, to prep, to analyze what you're doing, and you'll get a lot more out of it. So I want to make sure I save a lot of time for questions here because everybody on with me live and everybody listening back to this is coming to this with a different business in mind, maybe a different type of campaign you're looking to run. And I think it's helpful to be able to hear examples of what people are dealing with and to think, okay, I'm not in the same industry as the person who asked this question, but what ideas can I take that'll work for my industry as well? I think sometimes the best solutions or the best ideas are already being executed for another industry. It just hasn't been thought of for the one that you're in yet. So it's feel free. This is a great time to start putting questions into the chat about specific tactical things that I presented here, big picture ideas, or maybe a specific type of campaign you have in mind that you really want to figure out how to leverage it for your business. Any of those things can work in the chat at this point. So as a reminder of what we've talked about, we had a little section on defining what a campaign actually is for the purposes of this presentation. I gave you a whole bunch of different categories. There could be other things that you had in mind that you could add to that yourself. Setting objectives. We talked a bit about how important it is to do that and some of the different types of objectives you could be setting that you could be trying to achieve, defining what success looks like and giving some examples of that. Then we looked at establishing timelines and sort of giving you that framework for how would I plot out the on-ramp, the launch date, and the off-ramp period, and what order of operations would I put in for, what goes in first and what you're building around for the rest of the campaign structure that you're putting in place. Then we talked a little bit about debriefing. What questions are you trying to answer? How do you build in time for this? So these are some of the things that we looked at in a broad way, but feel free to jump in with questions about any of those things. And I do see some coming in. I'll give a little time for more to come in, but I just wanted to let you know we've got one more webinar in this series that's coming up October 15th. 12 to 1:30 p.m. Central. It's a 1.5 hour presentation. And this one is profiting with partnership marketing. In this presentation, you probably heard me say partnership, I don't know, a dozen times. I'm a big believer in collaborating with other businesses and or influencers to get more out of everything you're doing. So in a way, the Profiting with Partnership Marketing webinar is sort of an extension of this one, because if you're starting to if you're starting to plot partnership opportunities and stakeholder outreach into your timeline, this webinar will help you see how much more you can make of that. So I encourage you to check that one out if you're looking for ways to expand the audience for your business. And I'll take questions now as they're coming in. It looks like I definitely have some questions coming in now, but I just wanted to give you two pieces of information. First of all, there is a landing page on my website where I've loaded in the whole slide deck plus some additional reading resources. And I've got the link there at the top of the screen. I believe Julie will also be sending that out to you all. The recording of this is being captured separately, and Julie has that for you later. And then I also wanted to include here, if you're looking to work with somebody on this, how do you get in touch with ASBTDC to help you? I want to throw it over to Julie just to address that. Julie, feel free to jump in with that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa. You can reach us by phone, email, or you can go onto our website. If you are not a client, you can get a consultation by um, punching the red button in the far right corner, top corner of our website, and it will take you to the registration page. We cover Northwest Arkansas. I noticed that our colleague from University of Arkansas, Fort Smith, has been on today. So hi, James, welcome. And so we also have the center at UAFS. So if you're in the River Valley area, that would be your center. You can reach us at 479-575-5148. And the lovely Renee will take your message and get it to one of our consultants quickly. We can get you registered and get going in about 24, 48 hours, depending on your schedule. So in our email address is sbdc@uark.edu. That's the University of Arkansas email, uark.edu. And Melissa has it here on the screen. She did mention that I will be following up with an email that will contain the link that she has posted in the chat, as well as the link to our website. It's our resources page where you will find the recording of this webinar. So you'll be able to go back and look at the material, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. If you are not a client of one of our centers, and just so you know, we offer everything from consultation on starting a business to growing a business and even buying and selling businesses. So reach out to us or one of the other centers, and we'll be happy to help you.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. And I really feel like this particular presentation can be the gift that keeps on giving for you, because if you take the slide deck, if you take the recording, whatever campaign is in front of your business today, 1 year from now, you may be looking at a completely different type of thing. And if you come back to this, it just asks some central questions to help root you in how to approach the new campaign with the same ideas. So I do encourage you all to like hang on to this because things will continue to shift for your business and new opportunities will come up, but this approach can still work of how do I plan to get the most from this. And with that in mind, there's some really good questions coming up, and I want to take some time to address those. So the first one I'm seeing here is from Ragav, who says, how to pick or decide the right channels. I really like that question because, so first of all, tactically speaking, take the slide, what was it, step one? In that timeline section, take that slide where I had all those little idea clouds with different types of marketing channels. It's not a fully comprehensive list of everything that's possible in the world, but it's a really good starting point to help you think about what is available to you and what you're already doing. I would also encourage you to make a list of every target market you're trying to reach and then literally just like drag and drop, whatever format you're using. Say, okay, this is the audience. I'm doing these three things. Look at the list and just honestly use it to say, how am I already communicating with people? A question like Raghav's is easier to answer if you're already operating your business because you already have ways of communicating with people. And it's about saying, okay, what am I already doing? What are the options I have? If you are pre-launch, this is probably a little harder to envision and root yourself in how you'd operate it today, but it's still a worthy thing to think, okay, what tools are available to me easily that I can start with and how do I build from there? So I would start with that approach. I would honestly just sit down and like if you're already communicating, if you have a means of communicating with people in some way and you're doing a big campaign, use every means of communication you have. Why not? Why not tell people about what you're doing? Um, so this is just a way to sort of take stock of everything available to you. Now, Taylor asks, would love ideas and tactics for rebranding and stepping up marketing. Rebranding um, rebranding is a slightly more complex one than even the complex ones I've put here because you're replacing stuff. You've already got whatever your business is, you've already got some branding, some messaging out there, and you have to replace it both in existence and in people's brains. And in people's brains, it takes longer to get replaced. So you'll see that people who go through a rebranding process, sometimes you'll see like a middle period where here's what we are now, here's what we're going to be. And there might be a year in the middle where you're saying, name of company used to be this one. It's actually a three-phase process at least. Um, but I would say that with rebranding, everything that I put in that timeline still works, especially focus on the on-ramp and on engaging stakeholders. Because people who do rebrands, I don't know how you all feel about Cracker Barrel. Like it didn't work.
Mm.
I'm so sorry, Cracker Barrel. It did not work. They had to go back. They clearly did not get buy-in from their stakeholders. It is a very real-time, very current example of what happens when you don't get buy-in. So biggest idea and tactic I can recommend for rebranding, if that's something in front of you, make sure you get people's opinions, even if it's stuff you don't want to hear. At least they had a chance to say it and they feel like you considered them in the process. So hopefully that gives you something to consider there, Taylor. If you're actually working on a rebrand, I feel like that's a great opportunity to work with it, the SBTDC on getting like getting yourself like really a rock solid plan on how to approach it.
And we have a person for that.
Ooh, so good. You just like the more help you can get in a process like that, the better, I would say. Tammy is saying, how can we learn more about content of posts, ads, or images that help direct business? All of this sounds great, makes sense to me. I'm just not sure how to create content. Well, okay, so Tammy, really good question. And I think part of this is about first saying, okay, what channels are you using, right? Like if you're using social media, which platforms are, if you've got email or text means of communication with people, that will give you different formats to play with. Do you have like weekly social events or happy hours where you're seeing people? Well, then you need a verbal message, or maybe you need something physical to distribute. So I think the first piece of it is knowing exactly what channels are you using, because when you know that, you kind of know that each channel has specific rules. For example, if you're really active on like Instagram, would you communicate the exact same way there as you would on LinkedIn to a different type of more professional audience? Maybe not. So, some things are going to be more image based. Some things are going to be maybe they'll prefer videos. Some things are going to have character limits. The more you know about that, the more you can like write down for yourself all of the details that you're dealing with. Image size can be a factor there as well, but there's not a literal one size fits all. So it's about saying what are your channels and then actually writing down the rules that you're working within on each before you sit down to create the content. Um, and I think in terms of like how you create that content, I always say keep your stakeholder, like the target market that you're trying to reach with this specific message. Who is that person and what do they need to hear? And that may be different for you in different platforms that you're using to communicate with people. So, would you say the same thing to a VIP that you're saying to a brand new customer that hasn't been supporting you very long? Maybe not. So I think put the target market at the absolute center of all the messaging. And what I would recommend, Tammy, is when you're drafting things, draft everything, like group it by the target market so you know what you're saying to each group consistently. Um, so hopefully that kind of gives you a place to start at least with that question. Let's see. Oh, and Tammy, I think put a follow up there using all socials, trying to bring in new clients. Um, yeah, so I think, and again, with brand awareness, you don't even know who you're reaching. So that's another element as well if you're trying to get people that you're not as sure of. But hopefully, the like thinking of the target market first gives you a starting point for the conversation. And I think I see one other question from Taylor. Would love more info on using AI to help create content. You know what, Taylor? I'm not a good person to ask about that. I'm such a Luddite, but I there may be somebody in the chat who has a thought. And Julie, is there anybody from the SBTDC who has some AI knowledge?
We were just talking about that this morning on our team meeting. And yes, the answer is yes. Our marketing consultant can help with that.
Hmm. So, okay, perfect. So that'll be a really good resource to check out there. I mean, I know so many people are really focused on using those tools now. I just don't happen to be, so I don't have great advice to give you, but
I can give just a quick suggestion. There is it's not Chat GPT, it's Claude, Claude. And it's um, you if you wanted to, let's say, whatever your topic or product that you're trying to promote, if you will just you can just feed in sort of bullet points, and it will create. You tell them what you want. If you want an article, if you want a blog post, if whatever it is you're looking for, enter the information and it will send out content. And then you can take that content and edit it as you want. It'll give you some good ideas about even, may even be a good step in being able to create your own, and, use your own voice. And so anyway, try that. I think it'll be interesting at least to see what you find.
that's great. I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, but th those were great questions. Thank you, everybody, for putting those in there and for all the time that you took today to think about your marketing. I hope that this
Mhm.
helps.
All right. And Melissa, thanks again to you for a great webinar. And I know that I take notes because I always learn something new from your presentations, and I know that our participants do too. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Thanks everybody for attending.
Bye, everyone.